So when looking at the examples I already made, you probably wondered why the system wasn't retrieving dimensions and dimension values such as customer group, area automatically. Because the customer group is something which is typically for the customer. An area is also something which is typically for the customer, and maybe the business group is something that would be typically for an item. So instead of filling in all these dimensions manually, this should be something that the system could retrieve automatically. And that's what we will see now. That's what we call default dimensions in NAV. So by assigning default dimensions to master data such as customers, items, vendors, but also GL accounts and so on, we can have the system retrieve dimensions and dimension values automatically. Let's have a look at some features and then an example. So this is for me the most important setup feature on dimensions. So with default dimensions, we will link dimensions and dimension values to master data. So we can do this to a single account, as I will show you, but you can also do this to multiple accounts. And you can even link default dimensions to a table, which we call the account type default dimensions. Now, also one of the interesting things on this function is that you can not only link dimensions and dimension values to master data, but you can also make them mandatory if you want. And that's something that we can do with the value posting field. So there are three different options. We can use blank, we can use code mandatory, we can use same code and not 3 but 4 options, and there is also no code. So by using the value posting fields, as you can see here, we can make dimensions and even the dimension value mandatory if you want, and that will enable us to be sure that users always use the correct dimensions and never forget to use dimensions. So very important. Let's have a look at how we can achieve this in the system. And of course, I will use the customer I just created. And that was also the reason I created a new customer, because most of the existing demo customers already have some default dimensions, but not my new customer. So let me go to the customer card again, because remember, I've assigned Great Britain as the country region, which means that we can assign a couple of default dimensions to this customer. So how can we do this? Well, I will go to Navigate, and then I will go to Dimensions. So now we can start with entering the dimension code. And for example, the first thing I would like to enter is area. And then we can enter the dimension value code, for example, 30. And because again, let me show you again, 30 is Europe North EU. And this is the country code that Kronos should have. That this customer should have. Next, we have the value posting field. Now, the value posting field, very important. So value posting will define whether the code is mandatory, the code and the value is mandatory, or whether, for example, a specific code cannot be used. So let's make some examples. And in this case, if we say, okay, this should be area 30, then this is not only today, it will also be the same tomorrow, next week, next month, and so on. Which means that I would like to make not only the dimension code, but also the dimension value code mandatory. So, and for that reason, I can use same code. So same code means that we will have to use this combination with this customer. You see? So next, let me go to the next line. I can use, for example, let's say salesperson. So this customer has a default salesperson. And let's say that the salesperson is JR. So here in value posting, I do not want to use same code, because then only JR would be a possible dimension value. But in this case, I would like to have a little bit more flexibility, because when JR, for example, is on his annual leave, I would like to be able to select another salesperson that is replacing JR. So in this case, I will choose code mandatory, which means that JR will be suggested as the salesperson when you retrieve the customer, but you can still switch, for example, to Linda or to another salesperson, you see? So that's what code mandatory means. And then you have the other codes. I can say customer group. and I can say, for example, medium. And if I now leave the value posting code field blank, I do have all the flexibility, not only to change from one to the other value, but also to ignore the customer group if you want. You can also remove then the customer group. And then the last one, let me use purchaser, is no code. And with no code, I can block a dimension or a dimension value. Suppose in this case that I would like to block users from using purchasers in combination with the customer, I could do this like this, you see? So this is an example not only of how to assign default dimensions, but also how to apply the value posting rules. Let's now have a look. So what is the result now of this setup? Well, that's something that you will see when I make a new example. So now if I click on new, so I will of course search for my new customer, training dimension, there we go. I will assign, or I will select an item. Let me take the same item, location blue, 10 pieces. And now, without having to do something else, if I scroll to the back of the line where you can see the default dimensions, you can see now that my default dimensions have been assigned automatically. You see, I didn't have to enter them manually. I didn't have to go to the dimension page or whatever. No, the system retrieved them automatically because we have assigned them as default dimensions to my new training dimension customer. And that's of course a big advantage because in that way I can save time. I'm sure that these are the correct dimensions, and by using the value posting field, you can also make them mandatory.